Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second PES Fair Growth Conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you for this busy day, this important day, long day of discussion about fair growth, and I'm very glad to see you all this morning, so numerous at this early morning. Before we start, I have a few technical information. You have headsets in your seats with translation booths, so you have all the information there for the language that you want. We have several languages translated. If you want to take the floor after, and we hope that you will do, you have also microphones ready. You just have to push for the button when the floor is yours. And then finally, we welcome you to communicate on the conference with the hashtag Fair Growth, PES Growth 2017, and the hashtag is Fair Growth. Now, just before we start and we go in the deep of the discussion, I always liked one TV show which is Le Dessous des Cartes, which in 5 minutes on Arte explains you the problems of very complicated issues, and I think that it has always been very informative and very useful. And I would do, or try to do the same this morning in 5 minutes. A quote from Joseph Stiglitz: inequality is a matter of choice, it's the rule and policies that we put together. And I think that this quote is very timely. If Europe does not change, if it does not reinvent the way it conducts its economic policy, we will never be able to bridge the growing inequalities in member states and in between member states. And that will pave the way for new crises. A deep political crisis, as it will prove that governments and the EU is not able to care about people and, something that is very often said, to protect people. It will strengthen the rise of populism, and it will endanger social democracy, proving to be too weak or not having the strength to change the current direction of the European economy. So today the discussion is how we can reinvent this European economy. So let's see how Europe is performing today. As we can see, first slides, GDP growth. We can see that GDP growth is increasing in all member states. We do not have any longer negative rates, and it's a good news. It means that the European economy is picking up, even though we can see that we have differences between growth rates in the member states. And that's also connected to the question of public investment. Public investment is increasing all over Europe, and that is a good news. It means that the turn from austerity to investment is a battle that our political family has won. And that is clearly a link between the growth rates and the increasing public and private investment. Of course, in these investments, we have to take into account cohesion policy. From the period of 2007 up to 2013, 57% of government capital investment came via cohesion policy. And I want to underline that because we know that now a discussion on cohesion policy has started, that some people would like to cut it or to stop it or to diminish it. And when we see the important role of cohesion policy in terms of investment, I think that it's worthwhile to have a look at that before the discussion on later on. In terms of investment, we have also to mention the 500 billion euro invested thanks to the EFSI, the European Fund for Strategic Investment. That has been an idea, a proposal from our political family, and we are glad to see that now it has started with almost €500 billion invested in Europe. But is the EFSI promoting cohesion? Is the EFSI reaching all the member states? If you see here euro per person per capita in Europe, you can see that the redistribution is not as done as we would have wished, and you see that unfortunately some countries in Eastern and Central Europe are not benefiting as much as they should or as they could from the EFSI, and that's also something that we have to discuss later on. So that's good news anyway. What we can see is that now, since 2008, finally investment is growing up. And that's a good news, and we have to thank our family for that, because that's us that we've been pushing for more investment in Europe. And we are getting to average of 30%, which is an increase coming from the lower end that we have been facing a few years before. Now, is the situation better? Yes. Is it perfect? And that's the other part of the demonstration, is the problems. Number one, of course, number one priority for citizens in Europe is unemployment. And you can see that the situation is quite alarming still, that in many countries like France, Spain, Italy, and others, unemployment still consists of 2 digits figures, and this is clearly a problem in Europe today. Of course, we have to go down with the figures and to see that 17 million young people, the so-called needs, not in employment, not in education, not in training, people from 20 to 24 years old, here in these figures is 17 million people in Europe. Now you understand why we have been pushing so much for the youth guarantee in order to offer a solution to these young people. I don't think that Europe can continue to let its young generation hopeless. You can see the figures and the distinction between countries where it's almost 1 on 2 young people out of job, out of training, out of education. In terms of quality of job, you can see also that unfortunately, if there is job creation, the quality of the job creation is not there. With the level of part-time job, and we know that very often part-time job is not chosen, but that people are forced to choose, that is increasing in Europe, and that means that for the moment we have about 20% of part-time job in Europe. So we can speak about job creation, but it's important to see the quality of this job, and they are not always decent, as we know. Also, as an important figure in Europe is the question of poverty. Unfortunately, poverty is still very high in Europe, 2 digits in all member states, with a gap between countries, of course, and this is clearly a priority that we must have in our political family for citizens, is to get these people out of poverty. We have other challenges, the question of wage distinction between East and West, just to show an average, 18% of the EU salary average in Bulgaria. Of course, the issue of the gender gaps. So the first one is the low rate of women in the labor market, 10% less than men as an average, and also the gender pay gap with women earning less than men as an average of 30%. And then a very, very alarming figures is the question of poverty of children. 27% of EU children are at risk of poverty. We have now new challenges to come, as it was shown in the little film. The first one is the challenge of digitalization. This figure is a bit hard, but you can see that in all our member states, from the lowest, Sweden with a bit more than 40%, up to Romania, more than 60%, these are the jobs at risk from the digital era, and that's according to a study of the ILO and Bruegel, which means that we have to pay attention to how we will deal with now the digital world. Another challenge, of course, is globalization, that we all know, international competition that is putting pressure on wage, on jobs, and on standards. And then, of course, we have the climate change issue, which is also important. So where do we go from now with these facts, with this important element? And that will be the subject of our discussion today. Of course, it's progressive policies. We are the social democratic family. And we want fair redistribution. We want to fight against social and economic inequalities. We want to reform the Eurozone. And that will be important, a Eurozone that is efficient, acting in solidarity and democratic. It's the debate that will come very soon in December with presentation from the Commission, to fight tax evasion, to have private and public investment, as have been shown in the slides, and also our demand for a pillar of social right with a truly social action plan for the right of workers, social dialogues, workers' rights, and the capacity of governments to actually govern and regulate. So, being back to the quote of Joseph Stiglitz, inequality is clearly not our choice. We want equality. So today, what we have to do is design the rules and policies that will create equality and invent economy of the future. I wish you a very good conference, and I'm very glad to start this debate now together with you. And it's my pleasure to invite the president of the PES, Sergei Stanishev, former Prime Minister of Bulgaria, currently a member of the European Parliament, to open the discussion with his opening speech and pave the way for discussion. Sergei Stanishev, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Our lives begin to end the day when we become silent about things that matter. These words resonate today not less than they used to 50 years ago when Martin Luther King spoke them. This is why we are here today to discuss things that matter at the second PES Fair Growth Conference. Because things that matter for the workers, for the unemployed, for the children in Europe are very clear, they're evident. They want to lead a life of dignity. And here we are to speak about the European dream. I would like to remind you, we Social Democrats should never forget that people live in societies. They don't live in markets. And this is a crucial division between our thinking, our understanding, and the neoliberals who believe that the market forces should be unchecked, unregulated, and that they regulate themselves. We believe that it is the job of politics and the institutions to regulate and tame the market forces and to create conditions for dignitary life for every person. And we titled today's conference Reinventing the European Economy because to reinvent the European economy, we must reinvent the vision of Europe. Europe as it should be, Europe as it must be, and Europe as we want to make it. What does this mean? What are those fundamentals? There are three things. First, societies that are inclusive and fair. Second, societies that are green and prosperous, creating sustainable development. Three, societies that are democratic and progressive. Since the first PES Growth Conference here in Brussels in 2015, the European economy has shown signs of recovery. We have seen some encouraging trends towards more growth-friendly policies in Europe, and we've seen austerity-obsessed policies to have been recognized as a failure, whatever the Conservatives are saying, and if they want it or not. We've seen that the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact have been revised to give more flexibility to investment. And talks of a more social Europe are back on the table, with proposals for a European pillar of social rights. And we have all the reasons to be proud of these changes, because they have been achieved with a very strong pressure from our political family. From the first day of the economic crisis, we were saying that these are things which have to be done. But is that enough? I think definitely not, because we are seeing the balance that together with the positive things which are happening, there are many risks still existing and even growing, and systematic problems have not been overcome. So we continue to struggle with worrying increasing inequalities, which have been presented by Yonnec, between and within countries. The East-West divide is not only economic and social, but it is increasingly political too. And if we do not solve the economic divide, then the political will only grow in time. And we have tough new challenges to confront. We have to manage the transition to the digital economy in a way which ensures the benefits are shared equally and that the risks for too many people across Europe are tackled and controlled. We have to do the same when it comes to dealing with the forces of globalization and international trade. And TTIP, ACTA, CETA have all proven how difficult these questions can be from a social democratic perspective, to create conditions for fair trade, to protect our social model. And of course, we need resolve action to tackle the threats of climate change. And this has been a priority for our family in the last years. At a more general and more fundamental level, I must say that what has been damaged during the last years of austerity policies is the tacit trust between citizens and the European Union, between citizens and politics. And this, for me, is the deeper source of the crisis of legitimacy in the eyes of so many people. Because, dear friends, the battle is not over for us. The neo-fascists, national populists, may not have won as much as it was feared in many countries, in France, in the Netherlands, in other places in Europe. But we have to be vigilant, and it would be a tragic mistake to think that the danger is gone. It's not, because they will continue if we do not act decisively and if we do not use the window of opportunity to change Europe for better and to reconstruct confidence in the European institutions and in the policy-making process in general. So, is all hope lost? In 2011, Bart Simpson told his father, "This is the worst day of my life." And Homer tried to reassure him with the following answer: "The worst day of your life so far." So this sums up the attitude of some with regards to Europe and our societies. Things can only go downfall, they say, and some even rejoice this prospect. But we are here to counter the defeatist attitude, to counter the Tina theory, that there is no alternative. We are here because we know that we must, we can, work for a better tomorrow. This is our social democratic historical responsibility. And allow me to highlight what, for me, are the 5 key priorities in my vision for Europe. First, we must bridge the inequality divide that exists. This means proclaiming that the European Pillar of Social Rights should be effective by the end of the year, and going beyond words and declarations, because people don't trust words anymore. They're fed up with them. It means that making the EU a power that truly works for social convergence. And to get us started, as a very basic first step, let us fight for Europe to support decent minimum wages for everyone. This will be the first step in our social action plan for Europe, because Europe requires an action plan, not only a declaration about social pillar. I note that neither Juncker nor Macron had much to say about the social agenda in their much advertised speeches. And that is a lost opportunity. Speaking about a Europe that protects is good, but much better is making it a reality. And I cannot but regret that last week the European Commission, represented by Commissioner Jourova, has rejected the idea of presenting a new action plan on supporting the social economy, where 14 million people are working. And this was an idea promoted by the S&D group in the European Parliament. This comes to show, once again, that we must not give up the fight and the pressure on our issues, and we should make it evident and visible to the people. And that also means prioritizing youth, because it is us who started the youth campaign, the youth plan, the youth guarantee, which is working better in some countries, worse in others, but it's a reality thanks to our family. But what has been achieved is not enough, because youth guarantee requires a proper budget, as well as the broader youth plan. 5 billion per year for Europe's youth. As simple as that, but it is not happening until now. And that must change. This means organizing the European budget in a way that prioritizes citizens, prioritize social cohesion, prioritize territorial cohesion, prioritize youth, and then the rest, the new priorities which are declared almost every month. Europe must have the means that match its level of ambition. Every 5 years, the member states engage in a battle over the EU budgets. The debate is usually about curing 0 point whatever % here, reducing there. And it is clear that it is not a sustainable approach which can tackle the new challenges and the needs. It is certainly not enough about matching expectations of the European citizens. But this does not need to be so. And the answer, for me, is easy. Not that it is easy politically. In technical words, own resources. In normal speak, that means certain taxes, levies, etc., go directly into the EU budget, which then no longer needs to rely almost entirely on the negotiations between the member states. If we don't move in that direction as a union, then we shall not be able to deliver. It is very clear, so let's promote it, a social democratic family, at all levels. And I know that the group is on that position and will stand for this. But we need the support of the parties and our governments. Second, we must bridge the economic divide. That means reforming the Stability and Growth Pact. The EU should not only impose sanctions or hinder growth and socially oriented investment, as it has been happening in the past in too many countries, especially in the south of Europe. For us, the viability of the state is crucial, and we want well-managed budgets to support strong welfare states in the European Union. This means also reforming the EMU and quickly moving to the second phase of the reform, the phase of solidarity, the phase where the Union encourages more public investment and push for greater social protection, solidarity, and convergence. The EMU, the euro, is not just a currency. It is a symbol, it's also a political project, an idea of how EU is evolving. So those who turn it into an instrument of austerity are in fact undermining the European dream and the confidence in Europe. We are working hard to bring about the social vision of the EMU, based on 3 principles. Efficiency, to bring growth, jobs, and investment. Solidarity, to bring convergence between and inside the member states. Democracy, to give citizens the control they deserve over their future and the spending in the European Union. And I'm glad that work is progressing, but we need more concrete action. And we need to remain vigilant because there is much talk these days of proposals to turn the European Stability Mechanism into a European Monetary Fund in a way that would take control away from the Commission, away from the ministers, and certainly away from the European Parliament. This contradicts the democracy principle, so we must say no to such an approach. Change, yes, but change in the right direction. The ESM is not only about crisis management, it must also be about crisis prevention. And this certainly means enhancing the role of the European Parliament. We need to step up the discussion about the European Finance Minister, who would be a bridge between the Commission and the Council, and be accountable to the European Parliament. I think this is what public opinion expects. This means completing the banking union so that citizens are never again called to save an ailing bank and can be rest assured that their savings are secure. And this means continuing to battle for flexibility in budget rules and the introduction of a new golden rule that will give states the means to invest where and when it is most needed in these challenging days and years. This means putting in place fair and redistributive tax systems, fighting against tax evasion and fraud, making sure that every business, traditional or digital, small or multinational, pay their taxes where they make their profits. And we need to close the loopholes that internet giants have been benefiting from, with so-called GAFA tax. This means keeping up the pressure to finally implement the financial transaction tax, because also the financial sector has to pay its fair share. Third, we must bridge the industrial divide. This means investing in green growth and ensuring that climate action doesn't come at the expense of employment, industry, industrial communities, and affordability of energy. These concerns exist in Europe and among many citizens. Donald Trump is playing with these fears in the US, protecting a status quo that is unbearable in the long run or denying realities. The EU needs a just transition strategy with the involvement of social partners. We must encourage member states and regions to anticipate challenges brought by decarbonization that workers will face. Such a strategy will be key to provide new employment opportunities and create new local economies on low-carbon, resource-efficient future. But again, with a strategy to balance things. We have been shocked how some car producers cheated on their customers. And transport must become cleaner. Therefore, the future of Europe's car industry is dependent on better batteries. And I second Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič's idea to create a European consortium of battery companies, an Airbus for batteries. The EU needs to fund a fund to support European effort in green energy. We cannot sit idly by as China takes over a field. First, solar panels, e-bikes batteries, and soon e-car batteries that our continent should champion. This also means harnessing the digital revolution. We are not against technical evolution. It's unstoppable. We must be the ones that frame the changes brought by the digital revolution so that they benefit workers and society. They create opportunities and not take away them. We cannot let them destroy social rights that were won through decades of hard social struggle. Fourth, we must prevent a democratic divide. This means defending the rule of law wherever it is challenged. This is a complex political issue that needs careful consideration, of course. We have to be careful not to alienate citizens in any country or play into the hands of those who threaten the rule of law in the EU. Yet, we must also show that the EU is stepping up to defend its core values. And here I want to commend the work of Frans Timmermans, as the Deputy Chair of the Commission, in working within the EU framework to uphold the rule of law. This means enhancing European democracy. I would remind you that in 2009, we started the initiative of a common candidate from the political families, and the others followed. And this made a change, a substantial change in the European elections in 2014. So running with a common candidate in 2019 European elections, whom we should select in an open, transparent, and democratic way, is a must. We have to lead. We have to innovate and to be courageous enough. And let's discuss the idea of primaries. Why not? Let's make sure that the next Commission President is also chosen by the largest coalition in the European Parliament, as happens in all democracies. And let's put on the table the possibility of introducing pan-European electoral lists. I am personally in favor. Fifth, we must bridge the East-West divide. This means concluding the posted workers debate. The PS priority is for all Europeans, women and men, to have a decent job and adequate social protection that allows a good quality of life. This is why we promote fair mobility. On top of being a very real and substantial issue, posting the workers has also become an emblematic issue in this regard. And there is a real risk that it will increasingly divide our countries and societies. Europe needs to introduce also a European-level social inspection to tackle abuses, which are a fact. We must also use financial instruments carefully. This means promoting a strong cohesion envelope in the next MFF budget. It was already mentioned, but it means also a drastic action in relation to the EFSI. Did you know that in its first year of operation, 92% of the all EFSI investment was concentrated in the EU 15 countries only, and only 8% reached the EU 13. In these countries, it has become, to a certain extent, an instrument of divergence, not convergence. And we must complete the reform of the common European asylum system. A new Dublin regulation is needed. European countries must show the responsibility and solidarity to which they have already committed and enhance the relocation of asylum seekers. It means also opening legal channels, disrupting activities of criminal smuggling groups, strengthening our borders and its control, and engaging in integration policies to overcome prejudices. Europe cannot continue to treat also its member states and citizens differently. And personally, I must say that it is high time for the EU to make the necessary steps into accepting Bulgaria and Romania into the Schengen zone. These two countries have fulfilled their obligations and deserve to fully enjoy the benefits of the Schengen area. Continuing to deny this right goes against the European spirit of solidarity, but also against the core interests of Europe, and undermines the confidence and trust that the EU is doing what has been promised, what is the EU's obligation. Dear friends, I will listen today carefully to your contributions, to all your interventions, questions and answers, because I know that whether you are a speaker or a member of the audience today, we all have to contribute to this common effort for a better tomorrow, and to show that our family can generate such a better future. Our contributions will be very important bricks that will lay in the building of a new economic model for Europe, for which social democracy will stand and fight. a new economic model that reflects the Europe that we want, a Europe that is the most inclusive continent, the most equal and prosperous continent, the most green continent, and the most democratic continent. This is how we will bridge those divides and be the continent with the best quality of life for all. A union that creates hope and chances for all its citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sergei. And I would like to apologize the chair of the S&D group, Jenny Pitella, that could not be with us this morning with a very late last-minute commitment. And it's my pleasure to invite the participant of the first panel on green jobs for the future. So the chair moderator will be Kathleen van Brempt, MEP, vice chair of the S&D group. We are very glad to have Madam Ylva Johansson, Minister for Employment from Sweden. So thank you very much, Madam Johansson. And then Claire Courteille, the director of the ILO Brussels. So the floor is yours for this first panel, and I thank you very much.
Good morning. It's amazing, eh? 3 women. Good. No gender balance. No gender balance. No, we should. Normally we would have been 4, and that would have been a male, but he couldn't make it today. So no problem. I think the overall gender balance will be okay. I think in this very important day, and I would like to thank Sergei not for a very inspiring speech. And you should look, whenever he says the word green, he looks in my direction. I'll explain that to you just in a second. I think it's very important that we have a day as today to truly discuss fair growth. And this panel will talk about jobs in the green economy, or the green jobs that are emerging, and how we have to and can deal with them and make them a positive story. Let me first say something very small about myself. I'm the vice president in the S&D group, and my portfolio, as they say it, is related to everything that is green in the parliament. That is everything that relates to sustainable development. In the ITRE committee, which is energy and industry and research and development, the environment committee, and the transport committee. And I'm regarded a little bit as a sort of green socialist, and I'm proud to be that. But when I became the vice president in this term, I had for myself one main task, and that is to make sure that within our very big, still very big, very ambitious political group and political family, because for me that's one, the group in the parliament, the parties at the national level, and of course at the PES, to make sure that everything that relates to sustainability is not something on the side that relates to environmental policy, but that's in the core of what we are, our DNA, in the core of our policies. Because I strongly believe, and that's my first introduction that I wanted to make. Almost 2 years ago, we had the Paris Agreement, and it was in a time, still we're a little bit in that time, in a not so optimistic timing, war in Middle East, refugee migration crisis, economic and financial problems, and still the world was able to make a global agreement on climate change and how to tackle that. And we could have a full day of discussing, is that ambitious enough? Should we do it in a different way? But I don't think that's the way we should conduct politics. We made a global agreement, and let's now implement that. But it's not just enough to implement climate policy and circular economy and green growth and all these things that relate together. For us social democrats, and that needs to be in the core of our attention, and it was also what Sergei said, it's not just enough to take that sort of green choices. They need to be fair. Because when you look to climate change and the effect in Europe and the effect in the rest of the world, it is also, no, maybe it's foremost, first of all, a social issue. Let's never forget that. It's not just an environmental problem that we need to solve. It is an issue about fairness and about social policy. And I think that's very important that we can stress that. And let me give you an example on technology and the future of our industry. Because industry is extremely important in our economy, in Europe and in the world. And it is not so that if we implement the Paris Agreement and we go for green jobs and we go for that implementation, that most of our industry will vanish, will disappear. On the contrary, if you want to build a wind farm, you need steel, and if you need to refurbish and make fully energy efficient buildings and houses, you need the chemical industry very much. So we need them, but at the same time, we need to say that some of the industries will go away. There's no future for coal in Europe. I know it's difficult to say, but I'm very blunt on that. There's no future for coal in Europe. But when you're a social democrat, you don't just say no future and we move on. We know there's a lot of people working in that industry. And that's why we as social democrats in the European Parliament fought very hard for a just transition fund in our climate politics, to make sure that we take these countries are still a lot dependent on coal, that we take them along and we make sure that people who are working in there, we just don't say, that's maybe one of the mistakes Hillary Clinton made in the United States. She also gave that message, and you need to be honest, but at the same time you say, but we will not leave you alone. We will make sure that in the future we will get you new skills, we will not just transform our industry, not just transform our economy, but transform our people and make sure that they're still well protected and they have a future in other industries. That should be in the core of social democrats. Second example, and then I'm not going to give a very long speech at all because I have two very interesting people on my sides. But the second thing that I want to convey as a message is to be able to do that at the European level, we need good regulation. We've had a full discussion about better regulation, but better regulation does not mean a weaker regulation. In my spare time in the European Parliament, I've been the president of the inquiry committee on the Dieselgate affair. That's been very interesting because it was the first inquiry committee in the European Parliament since more than 10 years. So it was a little bit, how do we deal with that? Because that's food for thought for another day, but one of the democratic problems in Europe is, of course, that the Parliament is not yet as powerful as many of our national parliaments, and one of them is an inquiry committee. We didn't have the full force, but we did achieve a very good report. And there you can see that if we would have had not just ambitious laws on not just on CO2 but also on NOx, but made sure that we implemented them, enforced them, that it would have been good for our industry. Because now we have an industry that is not, the car industry, that is not delivering on cars for the future. And if we're not prudent and we not make sure that we have fair and good regulation and force the industry to go in the right direction, in the future we will be buying Chinese cars. And I don't have anything against Chinese cars. Well, I don't know, but I would want that the car industry is a European industry and that the electrified cars are built in Europe. And to be able to achieve that, it's absolutely important that we get a level playing field in Europe and that we implement very ambitious regulation also on CO2, also on the other emissions. Well, there are two examples that I wanted to implement in the debate before I give the floor. I first would want to give the floor to Ylva. Is that the good pronoun? No. Yeah, but it's not good, I see that. Who's our Minister for Employment and Integration in the Swedish government and Sweden when it comes to green growth. let's be honest, Sweden is always an enlightening example in Europe. You have the floor.
Thank you, Kathleen, very much. My name should be pronounced Ylva, but I think that's very difficult for many people. It means a female wolf.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about the green economy and the transition we have to go through. And let me start as being a Swedish social democrat. I'm always very proud of social democrats before me who actually were brave and strategic to form the Swedish society. We have a high level of welfare society. We have the highest employment rate in the European Union. We have come quite far when it comes to gender equality. We have high productivity. We have high taxes that are broadly acceptable. We are a competitive economy. And I should say that's very much thanks to social democratic reforms that have been implemented, such as free and good childcare for everybody, a good parental leave, individual taxation, huge investments in welfare, but also with social partners. We have an agreement that we should not protect jobs. We should protect workers. And this has really been a way forward. So that means that Swedish unions and employees, they maybe not embrace always when their jobs are gone, but they accept it because we say we should not try to keep the jobs or to, by subsidies, help companies that are not competitive to survive. We should better help the individuals not to suffer from losing their job, but to have a good financial support and even more important, a good educational support to transfer into a new job. And this is actually being quite successful. And as an example for that, we had an important union leader, and he was asked by a journalist, "Are you afraid of new technology?" And he answered, "No, I'm afraid of old technology." And I think that's an approach that has been very fruitful for Swedish economy, because we can also see when we are embracing actually transformation and new way of producing things and organizing labor market, that also means we have better jobs. So we have a low percentage of low-paid jobs. So we can go higher and higher up for better and better jobs. So that has been good. Why am I starting here? Because I think that what we are talking about here and what's really the most important issues for us right now is the transformation into the green economy. But also, I should say, transformation for society to be able to have a sustainable approach towards migration so that we also can implement new persons in our society. But I won't go into that right now. So when it comes to the implementation of the green economy, we see that from our perspective, being in the forefront of transforming industry it's been good for the competitiveness for Swedish companies. This is really what we export. We're exporting things that really are in the forefront with new technology. And how can we implement that? Of course, we need we do some investments together with industry. We do some other investments, of course, to the transformation. But I should say that the most important thing is that we set up, and this is, I don't know any other country has done it, we had set up a new legal framework, a climate legal framework that's been accepted broadly by the parliament. Not only by governmental party, but also broad. So there is a law saying we have to keep to our climate goals so that we could reach them year by year. And this means this government that I'm part of, but also future governments, has to follow this. And that means also for business sector, this is really clear. This is a law. This is what's going to happen. So they can also plan for this when they make their prognosis, and when they make investments. This is what's going to happen. And by law, we have to follow the climate goals. And by law, we have to make reports on this and set up new goals in a period of 4 years. I think this is important, and part of this is also that we're going to be, that's our aim, to be the first ever fossil-free welfare society. In 2040, there will be no more petrol at all in Sweden. So this is what you have to plan for. In 2030, we will have reduced from the transport sector all use of fossil fuel by 70%. And this is huge. So now and car industry is a big industry in my country. And they have to adopt to this. And this is the way we think it's a way forward, to set up long-term goals and to make sure we're really gonna follow them year by year. So we have to come down more and more and more and more, and we would not back down from these goals. We set up also to say when we talk about, of course, some jobs disappear when we go through this transition. That's for sure. But we think that it's worth it, because we can have a more competitive economy. And it's quite an easy way for my country, because we have this approach for many years. Unions and employers and companies agree that you have to be competitive, otherwise you can't be at the market. So otherwise new companies has to emerge. And this is really what we see happening. And we say we would like to be like a permanent international fair or expo for the green economy. So we said in all parts of our country, that should really be a place where people can come and be inspired and learn from how you can do new things. Let me just put, to conclude this, some extra, what I think it's about digitalization we talked about here, and I think that's part of the transition into green economy. And what we learn is when we do huge investments to have a more equal society, this by accident happens to be very good for innovations also in the new technology. And just one example, 20 years ago, 20 years ago, when people were starting to having PCs, you remember? And it was those well-educated, well-paid employees that could have the opportunity to have a PC at their home. You remember the situation. And we said as Social Democrats, everybody should have a PC at their home. So we made a huge home PC reform. Make it affordable for all ordinary families to buy a PC at home. We did it because we thought it was good for equal opportunities in society. But accidentally, what happened? All children in Sweden had the opportunity to play PC games on their parents' computer, and they did. And now we have actually flourishing gaming industry that is one of the biggest export from Sweden. Gaming industry is actually bigger export than iron ore, which used to be our basic industry in Sweden. So that's also, I think, it's good for us as from our family, when we go do investments in equal opportunities, that could also be good investments for innovation and economic growth. As we know as Social Democrats, these are not against each other, they go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ylva? Ylva. Yeah, it's a pronunciation that we do not have in the Dutch, neither in the English language. So thank you very much for your very inspiring speech and examples. I'm always, I have to say, very jealous of the Scandinavian way of putting long-term goals. And do that across party political lines, because that is extremely important if you want to make sure that you head your economy in the right direction. I know it's not only politics that can make the economy, but making the framework and make it solid and make it long term, and then make sure that economic players know what the framework is always has been a success story. But if I look to the different member states, and the member states I know best, that's Belgium, then I know that we still have a long way to go. At least it's also the methodology that we try to use at the European level. We're now in the middle of the clean energy package, and that's also working on very long-term goals on energy efficiency, renewable energy, things like that. So one of the aspects of success for the future, I believe. And now I would like to give the floor to Claire Courteille. It's a language I can understand much better. And you're the director of the International Labour Organization, and I gladly give you the floor to give your input.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I was thinking of putting actually 3 messages or key messages or ideas that I wanted to share with you on that topic. The first one is that I think this discussion on green jobs and green growth takes place against the backdrop of a very important message we have received from the international community. As you know, the 2030 Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement that you refer to, they have both refuted the argument that environmental sustainability can only be achieved at the expense of growth, job, and development. And I think that's very important. The 2030 Agenda, the Development Agenda, and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are part of that agenda calls for action to promote prosperity and to protect the planet. And the Paris Agreement recognizes the imperative of a just transition for the workforce and the creation of decent work for all. So I think this important message, this is a very important message about the reconciliation of those 2 imperatives. And of course, the creation of green jobs is the best illustration of it. And we have very good news to announce and to share on the creation of green jobs. In the ILO, we did a couple of years back, we did a study, and we came up with the conclusion that globally, up to 60 million jobs, green jobs, could be created if we were to move toward a low-carbon economy, 60 million around the world. We also have, there is a new report of the Renewable Energy Agency, which says that in 2015, there were 8 million people globally working on renewable energy. And we've got, I think, more than 1 million within the EU on that. So that's also a very good example. And we have, I believe, more than 3 million people in Europe working on the circular economy. And those numbers are growing. So the potential definitely for job creation in a green economy, for green job is there, and it should be realized, as you pointed out. Now, of course, the reality is complex and is diverse, and it has been said, I mean, the transition toward a low-carbon economy will destroy jobs. I think we have to be very honest about that. It will destroy some jobs. And it will also force us to redefine many jobs as well, because if we want those jobs to be made climate resilient, then they will need to be redefined. Also, we should not assume that all green jobs are decent by definition. They will become decent by design, and this is where I think the ILO, and in particular the international labor standards that the ILO is promoting, can be useful in order to make those green jobs decent. And that leads me maybe to my second message, which is about managing the transition. I think Sweden is certainly a good example on how the transition can be managed, but it might not be the case in many countries. But what Sweden, I think the example of Sweden is this coherent framework that is really needed, and we may not have in many countries. So we need, I think, a very coherent political and policy framework that includes adequate skills development program in order to enable the workforce to take up the opportunities that the green economy represents. We certainly need good and predictable regulatory framework, as has been said, to stimulate investment, to promote those green jobs. We need also we need investment in renewable energy. I think that's also a very important point. We need supportive tax policy. We need public investment. We need social protection to protect the most vulnerable. We also need support to companies, and in particular to SMEs, so that they can continue to produce the green goods and services that are needed for the transition. And we, given the scale of the transformation we're talking about, we certainly also need the involvement of all stakeholders, including the social partners, of course, when it comes to labor market aspects of it. Now, my final remark may be on the just transition. As you know, the ILO has been strongly supporting and promoting the just transition. And the just transition is about maximizing the opportunity that climate action represents, and of course the stimulation of green jobs and green growth. And it's also about minimizing the negative impact through reskilling programs, social protection, investment, and the like. But the way we understand the just transition is in the ILO might be a bit, we have our own way of understanding the just transition. And I think it is more than, the way we understand it at least, is that it is more than addressing the number of jobs that can be created or can be destroyed. It is an agenda for change. The just transition is an agenda for change, and it takes account of the fact that neither the causes of climate change nor the capacity to react are equally distributed among countries and among people. So those countries that are likely to be most affected by climate change, and I'm thinking, for example, in Africa, some African countries, are also the countries that are less likely to react, that have less capacity to react. And the same for people within our countries. The one that might be most affected by those changes might actually be the one that have less capacity to cope. So those imbalances, and the concept of the just transition proposes really to redress those imbalances and to deliver on decent work, on social protection, on social cohesion, and on the eradication of poverty. So it is really an agenda for social justice. And it's about a new model that really puts people and the planet at the heart of development. So that's the way we understand the just transition, and that's the way the ILO has been working on these issues throughout the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire. I think that should be one of the baselines of today, one of them. Social justice, the agenda, climate action should be the agenda of social justice. You've been already, what I think, sorry, I want to look at an hour. Jesus, sorry. 11:08, so you've been quiet for one hour and a half. You've been listening very carefully. I think it's now time for you to take the floor, say your opinion, ask questions on the two very important guests that we have today. Who's going to be the first? I wanted to start this morning by saying there's an awful lot of very young, ambitious people in the room. That's good. You are the future. We are the ones that should make the future happen for you, and you should be very much involved in pushing us in the right direction. What do you think about the green growth jobs? What do you think about climate action? How should we combine these social justice agenda and our green growth ambitious? Nobody a question, nobody... Yes, good, thank you. There's a micro? There's in the seat a microphone, amazing. New technology.
Hello? Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Tell me, tell us who you are, where you come from, what you do.
What I do. So my name is Noemi. I'm from Germany, and I'm an S&D group trainee. And yes, my question would be, because I also think it's very important and that both subjects are not contradictory. But if I think about my personal reality, my family or whatever, I would think that people think it is contradictory. And I would be interested in what would you propose to explain them and make it more visible that it's not a contradiction and actually it's a good thing to combine both. So what do you propose to even education in schools or something? Thank you.
Okay. Ylva.
I think this is a really important issue they are taking up, because we have to listen carefully to people, because some people are very much afraid of they're gonna lose when we go into the transformation of green economy. And I think that's why we need social democratic policies. So we have to ensure that when jobs disappear, for example, there will be a good new opportunity for workers that lose their job, so they can go into new and better jobs, because we know that new jobs will emerge, but they might not, those who lose their job might not be able to take the new ones because they are lacking the right competence or also faith, actually. So this is, I think, really, you have to first invest in a good security system and good opportunities for people. Otherwise, they will be against the new technology. One example in my country was about the transport sector. We are huge part of my country is just covered by forest and very, very scarcely populated. And they really need their cars. And when we say we're going to go to fossil-free, they were started to be angry, because there's never going to be public transport here, because we are so few living in this area. Then the traditional discussion was about leave the car at home, go by public transport. So that's why we really had to invest in how you could continue with your cars. We just changed the fuel. So you're going to be climate good. And then we put out recently, we subsidize heavily when you buy a climate-friendly car. And we are heavily taxation if you continue with your old problematic or dirty car, or even if you buy a new one, it's going to be very, very expensive. So we make it possible for people to choose to make good decisions. I think this is really important, because if you only put pressure, then it will only be those who are well off that actually had the chance to choose in the environmentally friendly way. So you have to use policy to make it easy for everybody, affordable for everybody, to make the green decision in an ordinary life. And I think this is really a social democratic what we really should, this is really important that we do this, because otherwise there's going to be a backlash from ordinary or working class people that can't afford going into the new economy.
Yeah, no, I would certainly support that, and it's a difficult arbitrage that sometimes has to be made, because indeed the people that might lose their job might not be in a position to take up new job in new green sectors. And there's also a question of regions. You know, there are some regions where you have, some type of jobs that might be destroyed, and then moving to another region can also be problematic for some people. So it's really about planning new development. Anticipation has been a word that has been mentioned before as well. But it's really about finding the solution, involving the people themselves. I mean, the example of having new energy to drive the car is a good one, because it is by involving the people themselves that you're going to be able to produce the solutions that are needed to the diversity of needs that will emerge as a result of the transition.
Okay, thank you very much. Over there. In this seat, yeah. Yeah, very, very nice. But it should work, yeah, maybe.
No, it works. Okay. Norbert Fabian from Germany, Social Democratic Party. I have a question. I mainly agree with your speeches. I have a question, small question to the European trade union movements. In Germany, we have the problem that the green sectors are badly, the workers are badly or weakly organized in these sectors, and very few members of the trade unions. On the opposite side, the coal industry is very well organized. The unions are very strong there, they're lobbying there. And my question is how we could politically support also as parties, that more workers organize in unions in these green sectors, in these green jobs we hope we could create in the future.
It's a very good question, but not very easy to answer. Claire, International Labour Organization, are they into that sort of subjects?
Well, yeah, of course. I think first of all, it's up to the union to organize in those new sectors. But of course, you can as a government or a local government, you can create this enabling framework for organization to take place. And I would say that's a similar situation in the digital sector. We have those new digital type of works, and the unionization is rather low in those sectors. So I think there is an internal work that has to be done by the union to reflect on how they can reach out to those new workers, new type of workers, and how they can organize them. But surely we need to have a very strong legal framework in place that would support freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining, and that's something that the government can take responsibility for. Yeah.
If I can add something to that in a more general way, it's something that really concerns me. And it's happening in many of our member states. I don't know whether it's the same in Sweden, but in Belgium and in Germany and the Netherlands and the central part of Europe that used to be very highly, with a lot of people being member of a union, with very, very strong social dialogue, being the pillar of the social security systems and so on. That's how Belgium, for instance, is organized, but also many other countries. But the atmosphere today is very anti-union. Well, it's very political parties as well, but it's very anti-union. We had a strike this week. I don't know whether you had... you saw that because you needed to take the train or public transport in Brussels. There was a strike in Belgium on the public services and on the lack of investments in public services. And all the press were extremely negative, and all the right-wing parties used that heavily to further undermine the support of unions. And yesterday there was at national TV there was a documentary on the lack of staff in mental hospitals and elderly people should be cared, and all of them, everybody was astonished and surprised, and they said there should be more investments. So when unions say the same thing and they come on the street and they use their force to say it's no longer allowed, you need more public investments, and everybody says it's a disgrace, you should go to work, and very anti-union, and on the other hand people are concerned about public investments. Why do I say that? Because of course you have your very firm power base in the old but also future-minded industries. The chemical industry, for instance, I keep on saying they have a lot of future also in the green economy. But not in new rising economies, and that's also related to the overall attitude in our society, which is very anti-union. So I think it's also a task of the broad family that we are to change that. But also unions should change. Also unions should be modern organizations where young people feel at home, where young people who, for instance, take up the defense of people who do not have full contracts in the old industries, but are the new, very vulnerable flex workers. Take up their defense. That's extremely important. So we need a lot of steps. We need another political atmosphere that we should do together, but also the union should, of course, modernize themselves.
I do totally agree, and I think this is very. In Sweden, we have 70% of the workforce are organized in unions. It's a higher percentage among white-collar workers than among blue-collar workers, actually. And I do agree. It's important also that unions actually modernize themselves, and I think it's important for unions also to be talking about the emerging jobs. Not only about those existing jobs, because a lot of people are worried and interested in where are these emerging jobs and what are they like, and how do I going to reach them, and it's going to be possible for me, or what's going to happen to economy. And I think it's important that unions balance the interest and the energy put on existing jobs and the energy for the emerging jobs. But just to give one example, as I said, we had this attitude of not protecting jobs but workers, and we can see now when technology has come so far that we need very few workers in industry, very, very few, and that's usually it goes hand in hand with a more green technology also. So we had a period where a lot of Swedish jobs moved to low-paid countries for producing. Now they are moving back because we need such few workers, so it's no problem with the high salaries we have in my country. And yes, actually, that's what's happening. So jobs are moving back because of we can do it more efficiently with fewer workers. So I think this is also a way, and for example, that the big transport sector, of course, they understand we have to be part of the new technology, otherwise our jobs will be gone. So this is also important for unions. So we have to go hand in hand, I think, with our family and the unions for having a positive approach for the emerging jobs and how we can turn them into good jobs and good working conditions.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Now I see a lot of hands.
Yes.
Now I have to be. All of a sudden,
yeah.
I need to
My name is Blagovet Svetkov. I'm a PhD student from the University of National and World Economy in Sofia, Bulgaria. I have a question for you, Madame van Brempt. Going back to the Paris Agreement and the coal industries, do you think the recent developments in the United States might serve to undermine, to a certain extent, the efforts of the international community? And in a more general sense, how do you tackle backtracking in these questions?
Very good question. First of all, I'm not afraid of Trump's decision. He took the decision. It's a very, very stupid decision, and it will, first of all, harm the United States economy. And the second reason why I'm not too worried is if you look to coal, for instance, because that's what I said in my introduction, maybe Hillary Clinton made a mistake not going to these states and explaining to people how the future will look like, and say that's more difficult in the United States, but because they don't have the social security systems that we have in Europe. But she should have said, I'm worried about your jobs and your future, and I will be the president that will protect you. She didn't do that, or not in a good way, and not in a way that people believed her. And Trump went over there and he said, I will safeguard your job. He will not, because there is no future for coal, also not in the United States. Already today, renewable energy is much more cheaper than investing in coal. And of course, it's always the same. If you have existing technologies and industries, you can safeguard them for a while being, although they're not very efficient anymore. But at the end, there's no future for that. So even Trump will not save these jobs, and at the same time, he's not giving what, for instance, is the very inspiring example in Sweden. He's not giving the future legal framework and the future politics that the new industries need. So I'm not too afraid. And the third reason is, and that's also something that's really very powerful in Europe, is that it's not just the federal state, it's not just the European Union of or the national states that will define our future. It's also our regional, our local, and our cities that are actually changing today. There are extremely bad fires going on today in California again, and it's not the only, but one of the reasons is it's extremely dry in California. They are facing already today huge consequences of climate change. California is not going to follow the line of Trump. They're going to do completely the opposite. And the last reason why I'm not afraid, I think it's a stupid decision again, and it's not good, and it's also not good for the Paris Agreement. I would have wanted it to be otherwise. But you see at the same time that these other emerging economies, China and India, for instance, do not change their role. Because they know if they want to give their people a future, they have to go on that pathway. And so the alliances change, and I am concerned about what's happening in the United States, but less on the climate issues, because I know we can make the difference, and also the states will keep on making the difference. I'm concerned for other reasons that much more to do with polarization, diversity, how you live together in these societies. But I think, although I do know that also in Europe we have our differences between member states, and for instance in Bulgaria and in Romania, we need to take this pathway together. That's why I'm so much in favor of the Just Transition Fund and the Just Transition, and we need to pursue in that direction. And I know, and I hope sincerely that you will do the same in your country, but I'm quite convinced that you will. But you do not see, you see the divergence, of course, if we're discussing today in the European Parliament, the clean energy package is a huge battle. But at the same time, you feel that Europe is still united when it comes to our global engagements. So I am optimistic. Okay. 2 more questions, quick ones. Over there and over there, yeah.
Hi. Is it working? Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm Carlos Campillos. I'm a researcher at IFG, the Global Climate Change think tank. First of all, thank you very much for this panel, because I think it's a must when we talk about the future, to talk about green jobs and green growth. I would like to ask you, because the Just Transition Agenda, it has a very important role for regions and local actors as well, because there are a lot of regions and cities whose development is actually very, very linked to high carbon activities or energy intensive industries. So, taking into account that we have a national minister here and a member of the European Parliament here as well, I would like to ask you, what is the strategy of Socialists and Democrats for linking cohesion policy and structural funds post-2020 with the Just Transition Agenda? Thank you very much.
Very good question, but we need a whole day to get... No, we should do that. We should do that, because I think it's very important. Also, Sergei mentioned that in his opening speech, the possibility to have more divisions in Europe between the East and the West, and it's not just on the content of files, but it becomes also political. And I don't see a future if we do not bridge that, and we can bridge that. And the cohesion policy is one of the ways to bridge that. But we need good discussions on that, how to deal with that, because you cannot do N. You cannot have the same agricultural policy and the same cohesion policy and then say, oh yeah, and we need also a just transition. You need to change the agricultural policy. I mentioned the agricultural policy because it's also key. And the cohesion policy and other policies should be the mainstream in these policies, should be the just transition. It should not be an extra pillar. Oh yeah, we have the cohesion policy, and then we have an extra pillar where we make sure that we have some money to do the just transition. No. We had a discussion with the FC as well, and it really made me angry when again and again, and I didn't win at all fronts. I was in the beginning the rapporteur for ITRE, which is one of the advising giving committees, and together with Udo Bollmann, who was our rapporteur, we fought for it really, really hard. We wanted FC to be fully in place for the just transition. And that means that you also have to decide that you will not invest in not just transition. So you will not, we didn't make it fully, but I give it as an example. Every country can decide they need another airport. I don't care. But I don't think Europe should spend their money on building airports. I'm sorry. We need that money to do the just transition at all levels. So my answer would be, it would be a full mainstreaming of the cohesion policy, but with a lot of solidarity from the richer parts to the more poorer parts, but based on that. That's also an answer to the first question. You need to combine our solidarity agenda with the just transition agenda. And the cohesion policy is a very good way to deal with that. But of course, it's a general answer to a question that should be very nuanced. Yeah.
This is a very big question, but just say one thing. I think it's important that we do not go and heavily subsidize our business, actually. I think for the business sector, the most important is that we set up the rules and the goals and be persistent on that. This is what you have to take into account when you plan or when you do investments. We're gonna have sharper and sharper and sharper and sharper regulation when it comes to climate, and you can trust us on that. I think this is the most important for the business sector. But I think we also have to invest some money, but we have to be careful so we do not just subsidize industry because they have to adapt to the competition. But we might help them with research and development. We might help them with things that market can't solve. For example, in my country, scarcely populated areas, we subsidize and both subsidize and force for electrical polar, where you can put for your car, electrical cars. That would not be for the market, but if we invest in that all over the country, that would be a better market for those who produce the electrical car. You understand? So I think we need this kind of investment, but it's really important that we do it the right way so that we do not subsidize so that it goes slower than it had done otherwise. So we subsidize the right thing so that we can use the market forces. And I think this is actually what the best for social democrats. We do not do the mistake to say society and market are the same, but we can also use policy in a way so that market forces actually can help us in the good development.
Okay, I said one more question, and to make sure that we keep on time, I had some final remarks, but we leave them. I think everybody can make final remarks. I think a lot of very interesting things have been said. I give the priority to the last question.
Okay, I promise I won't be long. First of all, I'm Stefan from Bulgaria. I work as a consultant for a few businesses in the plastic sector, mostly plastic recycling sector. And also some digital and e-commerce stuff, but that's beside the point now. First of all, I'd like to share my satisfaction with having such a panel on the conference here, Green Jobs of the Future, because people somehow find it sometimes difficult to make the link that actually the green agenda and the green economy is not some leftist idealistic agenda, but it's about everyday quality of life, quality of health, and so on. So it's a really socialist thing indeed. And yes, you mentioned that some sectors will go away, like coal mining. On a personal level, I come from a city with a big history of coal mining. But new sectors and new jobs will emerge. For instance, landfill mining might be a thing of the future because recyclable waste is still a resource that's so grossly unutilized in many countries. But this leads me to the question, to have the green jobs of the future, we need to have the green vocational education of today. So is there any policy thinking in that direction, policy thinking for training of green jobs and green professions for the future? And are we taking a centralized approach to that from EU perspective, or are we going to let this happen locally as and when it's considered necessary? Thank you.
Just one remark according to your question. We can see in my country, and I guess you can see it in a lot of other European countries also, that young people, when they are choosing where they would like to work and what kind of education they would like to go into, they are a big majority would like to find a job and a profession that makes a difference for the world. And many of them are very engaged in climate change. So we see that actually this is a market that is working. So companies has to present their what they are doing for young, well-educated people, saying that if you come to us, you will be part of the big change that's going to save the planet. And we can also see for education, what different education at university level, they have to profile themselves in an environmental or climate-friendly way. Otherwise, they can't find talented young people to choose it. For example, being an engineer is so important, but you have to tell young people, this is an engineering that will really help save the planet. And then a lot of more young people will go into it. So we can see that young people are actually using their power to change the attitude from the educational institutions and also from companies.
Claire. Yeah, no, education is crucial, and also skill development is crucial. To anticipate the skills that are going to be needed in the future in order to be, employable in this green economy. And just since this is the last word I'm going to say, I just wanted to refer. It's linked to your question, but it's also broader to the debate. Is that the ILO? So the workers' organization, the employers' organization, and the governments that are represented in the ILO adopted some guidelines on a just transition. So I could refer to that, and the issue of education and lifelong learning on on green skills is actually dealt with. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions, but thank you, Ylva and Claire, for your absolutely interesting contributions, and have a very nice continuation of this very important day. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Kathleen, Madame Claire Courteille, and Madame Ylva Johansson for this interesting discussion, and especially a good prospect for the future of European workers. Now we go for the second panel and moving into investment for social convergence, and it's my pleasure to invite at the podium our chair, Mojca Kleva, the president of the Progressiva Foundation of Slovenia, and then Ahmet Lawej, that I would like by the same occasion congratulate for becoming the new parliamentary fraction leader of the PS Belgium recently. And thanks also for being with us, Ahmet, as I know that you have very busy time for the moment, answering the Prime Minister State of Union speech before yesterday. And then we have also Aleš Melar. Also a pleasure, Aleš, to see you back at a PS event after being a colleague for some times in the PS. So PS is leading a very important job, as we can see. So thank you, Aleš, for being with us. And also Mr. Ivan Lešaj, the CEO, Chief Executive of the Investment Bank in Slovakia and member of the EIB Board of Directors. So the floor is all yours. And again, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Yonnec. We will try to move forward a little bit from the debate of growth and green growth and jobs into a bit more business-oriented sector, and this is investments. I'm sure from the questions before, I'm sure we will have questions in the end as well. So I would like to keep the time limit for everyone for a couple of minutes to have because the aim of this panel would be basically to discuss how investment can be used to bridge economical and social inequalities, and how to promote actually social convergence is really in line with what our president Sergei Stanishev was saying at the beginning.